You're listening to Opening the Harp Chakra, the podcast, bringing you beautiful, healing, magical harp music and talking with the artists that create it. I'm your host, Jay Michaels. Thanks for joining us today. Our guest is one of Scotland's leading composers. She has won many awards, also very widely regarded as one of Scotland's leading traditional musicians and leading Celtic harpists. She's performed and taught all over the world. She's released several CDs and published many volumes of harp sheet music. She has an online harp school as well. She joins us today from Glasgow, Scotland. Ailie Robertson. Ailie, so great to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Can you tell us about how you started with the harp?
Yes, so I started when I was about 12 years old. Before that, I'd been playing piano. But every year at Christmas, my school choir used to do a Christmas concert with a harp group in Edinburgh. And so I was sort of secretly harbouring this desire and kept pestering my parents, who sort of said, oh, no, you have to do a bit more piano practice. And finally, after about 4 years, I managed to persuade them. And so they hired me, Clarsach, from the Clarsach Society here in Edinburgh. And then that was it. I just totally fell in love with the instrument and never actually intended to make it my profession. But that's just the way that life worked out. So, yeah, I'm really thankful for that now.
Yeah, the harp had a different idea for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Oh, the music is beautiful, and I appreciate it. And the world is a better place now that you're playing harp in it, I think.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Let's listen to a piece of your music. I just fell in love with this one from the CD Little Lights. Can you please tell us about La Guissinette?
Yeah, La Guissinette. So this is a piece of music that actually comes from the Quebec part of Canada. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely fell in love with Quebecois music about 5 years ago now, to the point where I actually moved out to Montreal for a year and a half and lived there, kind of immersing myself in that French music and French culture. And this is a little Quebecois waltz. The title, it's a tune basically for a little boy called Gus, and this Guissinette is sort of it's like a slang for kind of little Gussie, essentially. So yeah, it's a tune written for the composer's son, Gus. So this is La Guissinette.
Legassinet from our artist today, our featured artist here on the podcast, Ailie Robertson from Scotland. And what a nice piece. Who's playing cello on that?
So the cellist is, her name is Natalie Haas, and she's
Ah,
kind of one of the leading Celtic cellists in the world.
yeah, she's kind of good, isn't she?
Yeah,
Wow.
she's fantastic. Yeah, real pleasure to get to play with her.
Yeah, it's a beautiful combination with the two instruments together. I always like that sound of the cello and the harp together.
Definitely.
So you've won some awards. I wonder if we can talk about some of those, perhaps maybe the Achievement in New Music Prize that you were awarded?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say my life is fairly split 50-50 between performing and composing. So yeah, I was really fortunate that I was awarded this prize for achievement in new music, for really kind of the work that I was doing at that time to promote new music and new competition in Scotland, and that was particularly for putting together a tour of a choir here and various Scottish composers that kind of went around Scotland. But it was all inspired by Celtic music and traditional music.
So you were in London for a little while. It looks like when you were there, you took the first prize at the London Harp competition.
That wasn't actually then. That was
Okay.
probably a good 10 years previously. But then I was back in London. I did my PhD in composition there at Trinity Laban Conservatoire. So I was down there for about 5 years, and then we moved back up to Glasgow 2 years ago now. I took a post lecturing at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland here. So I'm a lecturer in traditional music and composition here. So yeah, that brought me back up to Scotland finally.
Nice. So winning a harp competition like that is quite an achievement.
Yeah, it was certainly lots of practice.
Right.
I can say there's something, generally I wouldn't say that I'm a particularly competitive person or that I really think that music should be a competition, but I can also see, it's definitely a way to really have to hone your technique and to give you that absolute focus that is needed whenever you're competing. So, definitely had benefits for that.
Right. Well, you're really competing with yourself to be a better musician, right?
Exactly. And, as with all these, now I'm fortunate enough that most of the time I'm sitting on the other side of the table being the adjudicator. And that it's what you hear on the day. People can have good days and people can have bad days.
Sure.
So, music is always subjective. But, I think all these things, competitions and exams, there's something that absolutely you don't have to do, but they can also really help with your development if you use them in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so out of all the millions of awards that you've won, is there one specific one that you're most proud of? Or
probably the one that I'd be proudest of was the Scottish New Music Award again for innovation in traditional music.
Nice.
And that was for a big suite of music that I'd written for the Celtic Connections Festival here in Glasgow, a piece called The Seven Sorrows, which was all based around the keening tradition here in Scotland. And it was for harp and string quartet, a vocalist and electronics.
You're really a great composer, and you're really into, obviously, traditional music, Celtic music. What made you want to start composing music?
I suppose there's a couple of things. First of all, I think that one of the most important things about any tradition is really that it's a living tradition, or that's certainly what we have here in Scotland, that the tradition of Celtic music is not stagnant. While we look back a lot of times and we're looking at archives and we're looking at old collections and things like that, it's also a tradition that's very much living and breathing and is continually being added to. And I think that's one of the most important things about it. It's not just a sort of historical thing, a historical object that we have that we look back at, but it's really something that's adapting and changing all the time. And so in that way, it truly stays within the definition of folk music, which is sort of music of the people. It's music that's relevant to the people living and breathing today as much as it is about playing historical repertoire. So I've always felt that it's very much playing historical music is as much a part of tradition as writing my own and adding to that tradition that exists. So it's always been something that's been kind of a very natural part of it, and I think is a very important thing for everybody to be doing. And then at the same time, it was also something that as I was on tour an awful lot. One of kind of my main projects is playing with the band, and there was a point where we were on tour an awful lot. We were probably on the road about 6 months of the year, And so anyone who's played with a ensemble will know that at some points you're just desperate for your own sort of totally autonomous creativity, because of obviously in a band you're always having to compromise in some way. So composing really became a creative outlet for that. It was my way that when I was just on my own in a hotel room, I could express what I was thinking and feeling and seeing, and in a way that was sort of just really personal to me and that felt very authentic.
Well, let's feature another piece of your music here. This one, I love it. It's very cool. Got drums, violin, sax, a really driving harp part. Can you tell us what the inspiration was for the cooperage?
Yeah, so this is a piece that comes from my Traditional Spirits CD. And Traditional Spirits was a project that was the result of a commission to write a suite of music all about the Scottish whisky industry. So it kind of looked at this whole process from the grain in the field and the water in the lochs and waterfalls right through to finally drinking and enjoying whiskey. And a lot of the composition process I did actually in a distillery. So I spent some time over in Islay at various distilleries there, and also at the Glenfiddich distillery. And so much of the composition process really happened right there, like in the warehouses or where certain things were happening. And one of the places I was really taken by was the cooperage, where they make the barrels for the whiskey. And I'd always assumed that this was sort of a factory process, but it's very much not. It's very much still this really traditional craft there's only a few sort of people that really know the art of coopering still in Scotland. And so this piece was sort of meant to replicate the very percussive nature of what's going on in those cooperages.
From the album Traditional Spirits, the Cooperage, Ailie Robertson. So as you researched that piece, did you have to sample some of the spirits?
There was definitely a fair amount of sampling going
You
on.
had to do that, yeah. Okay. So you teach harp as well. You have an online harp school. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's a project that I'd actually had the idea for a while ago, but lockdown and COVID gave me the
Sure.
opportunity to finally make that happen. Because what I felt was that there's, I spend a lot of time in these online harp communities and things, and realizing that there's an awful lot of people who are self-taught or trying to learn, and they don't have access to teachers, and they're not learning in a very progressive way, which means that inevitably they're reaching a point where they sort of stagnate a little bit, or there's something missing. So I thought that when you learn from just a book, it's very difficult to have what you really need with harp. You need to see it and you need to hear it. But you don't necessarily need to have that one-to-one interaction all the time with the teacher. So instead, I spent a lot of time thinking, like, what do I really think are the absolute fundamentals, sort of the first 20 lessons that a harpist needs to get them from kind of absolute beginner stage up to a point where they're really playing pretty competently. And so sort of broke that down. So there's 2 courses at the moment. Each one is 10 lessons long. And in each lesson, we cover a new technical element, and then there's a tune that ties in with that technique. So it takes people really progressively through step by step, kind of building on the foundations of very solid technique until hopefully the point where then they're kind of in a position where they're really starting to feel quite comfortable and can then sort of filter through to things like I've got a Patreon group, which is aimed at sort of slightly higher levels, or into other online workshops or courses and things like that.
So a lot of people who play harp are self-taught. What is your thoughts about, because I am too, but one of the questions I always have is when you're starting to take lessons, is there one particular thing that you want people to kind of work on or get when they're transitioning from being self-taught into starting to take lessons?
Yeah, I think that there's 2 things that I think a good teacher will hopefully help give a student. The first is a really clear sense of goal setting and goal tracking, because I think it's very easy. I speak to a lot of adult learners who reach a point where they maybe hit a sort of elementary intermediate level, and then they feel very much like they stagnate. They're sort of playing the same level of pieces, and it's hard to feel like they're really progressing. They kind of get a little bit stuck. So the first is I think that a good teacher will help you get past that point and keep feeling that you're growing as a musician in whatever way that might be. So through the technical level that you're at, through your actual musical ability and understanding, through your theoretical knowledge, your sight reading, your training, all these sort of elements, but really help you find and track, like, where are the parts in your musical journey that are maybe weaker than others, and what you can do to help bring those on. So that's kind of, I think that's the biggest thing that a teacher can do, is help you with that. And then the other thing I would say that I am quite a stickler for good technique and for spending quite a lot of time on technical work. And I mean, my reason for that really is that through having taught people for the last 18 years, what I can really see is that if you try and address all the technical things in the context of learning a piece, it's very difficult, because obviously when you're learning a tune, you've got to think about the note order, you've got to think about the rhythm, you've got to think about your dynamics, the phrasing. There's so many other things going on. Whereas if you do most of that core technical work outside of your pieces, then it means that hopefully once you get to the pieces, you're meeting things that already you're confident with and you're comfortable with, and then you can just focus on the musicality of the piece. So that's something that, more and more I'm spending quite a lot of time really developing technical skills with students, and again, using them not just as I think a lot of people use technique books and exercise books as just a warm-up, but they should really be something that is challenging your technique and that's pushing you forward and that's helping you grow all the time. So if they're used in the correct way, then I think that can really do that. So I think that's kind of, I think that learning on your own is absolutely doable. And I've met lots of people who've taught themselves and are fantastic players. But I think that, even if you just decide to have a check-in with a teacher, well, I've got plenty of people who I maybe only see once every month or 2 months for a lesson, and it just lets us do that kind of checking in and goal setting and see where things are at and get that little bit of help and advice that they might need between the working on their own sessions.
Right. And obviously the end result, the sound and the expression is really important, but the better your base of technique is, the better you can express.
Exactly. Like I always liken it to for people who drive. I think it's very like that. Like when you're learning to drive, you're having to think about every single little thing that you're doing. You're thinking about your gears and where your feet are meant to go and when you put on your indicator and all those things. And it feels so overwhelming. And then it suddenly reaches that point where, now when I drive, obviously I'm aware of everything that's going on and I'm paying attention, but you're also, it's almost like you're in a sort of hypnotic state. Like everything is happening automatically. I'm not having to think about what gear I'm in. I'm not thinking about having my hands in the tent too. Everything just happens. And it's really the same with harp. You're trying to get to this point where your muscle memory knows what it's doing enough and in the correct way, so that then when you're playing a piece, you only need to be thinking about the musicality of that piece, and it just sort of flows much more easily.
So this next piece I'd like to play, I love the title. I just love the groove. Could you please introduce The Exploding Bow?
Yes, this is a really fun set of 3 kind of quite jazzy jigs. The first one is called The Exploding Bow, and I learned this from a band called Bioga, an Irish band. I don't know the story behind the tune, but I'm very glad I'm not a fiddle player with a title like that. Then the middle tune was written by Brendan Ring, who's a fantastic Irish piper and harpist. And this has become like a very popular harp tune. It's called the Lisnagun jig. And the last one in the set is a slip jig that I wrote a couple of years ago after a bit of an incident involving myself, my car, and some rabbits on the road in Skye. Well, I'll say that the rabbits ended up an awful lot better than my poor car did at the end of it. But I have 2 pet rabbits, and the thought of I come, you'd have all these little tiny hairpin bends on the roads up in the Isle of Skye and single tracks, and I'd come around this corner and there was this little family of rabbits, and it was just this like when you have got a split second to make a decision, you have to decide, okay, is it me or is it the rabbits? And I decided on this occasion the rabbits were going to live, and it didn't really matter what happened to me in my car. And sure enough, ended up in a very deep ditch and had to get hauled out by a tractor. But I'm glad to say the whole rabbit family survived.
Excellent. So that's from the CD First Things First, a very cool collection of pieces, starting with The Exploding Bow from Ailie Robertson. Ailie, I was looking at your Facebook page, your harp tips blog specifically, and
Yeah.
I found the most recent one kind of cool, tips for learning by ear. And I want to talk about that a little bit because some people really like to learn, read sheet music.
Yeah.
Some people always just stick to sheet music. Some people don't read at all. But there's a happy medium somewhere in between, I take it.
Definitely. I mean, I think that they are both such important parts of being a good musician. I find that if I teach or if somebody has learned only by ear, that normally gives them a really great foundation at the start. But what I find quite quickly is that once they get to maybe about grade 5 standard or so, it becomes very difficult to then progress beyond that because as you see from any music books, the tunes start to get longer and they start to get more complicated, and it becomes more and more difficult to process all of that information by ear. So I feel like with ear alone, there's sort of this threshold at which it's hard to go beyond a certain complexity. At the same time, I think if you only ever rely on reading, you're missing a huge part of learning music. Music is essentially a language, and we learn language when we're babies by mimicking what we hear. And that's always been, anyone who's learnt a foreign language will tell you that the best way to learn is by going to that country and immersing themselves in it and just hearing it all the time. And it's really the same with music. Like it's not a written form of communication, it's an oral form of communication. So if you're only ever learning from sheets, I think that probably you're not engaging your ears well enough. And, again, in developing a really good, strong sense of musicianship, I think it's important that you are challenging your ears all the time as well. So really, I think that for anybody who wants to be an advanced musician, it's great to have both skills. It's not an absolute, but I think that for most people, if you can get both skills to a really comfortable level, you'll be in the best possible position. And then oral skills, I think, are always a bit more scary for people. I meet an awful lot of adults who just say, I can't learn by ear. It's absolutely not something I can do. And then my response to them is always, well, if I got you to pick out Happy Birthday on your harp, could you do it? And they're like, oh, yeah, I could do that. I could figure out the notes. You're not going to get every single note right, but sure, you could figure it out over time. Yeah. And I'm like, well, that's it. You've just learned something by ear. And they say, no, but I already knew the tune. Like, but that's not the point. The point is like you're taking something that you have the internal sound for and you're translating it onto your instrument. And that's all that's happening when we're learning by ear. We're taking the sound of something and we're then figuring out what's happening on our harp with it. So I'd always say to people, start with tunes that you know really well. Start with something that you have, with a tune that you've known since you were a kid, and start trying to figure it out from there. Because it's always obviously a lot harder if you've only heard a tune twice, it's going to be an awful lot harder to learn it by ear because you don't have it internalized. But if you are therefore trying to learn something that is brand new, then I'd say before I even touched my harp, I would always listen to it a couple of times. I'd get to the point where I was getting really quite familiar with how it went. I could maybe sing it, and then from there, start to pick out what are the key parts of it, what's the start note, the end note, what key am I in, are there little phrases that repeat, what's going on with it, and kind of process it from there. But it's a very systematic process, and I do believe that anybody has the ability to do it. It just takes practice like any other part of harp playing.
Yeah, I like your point there because for me especially, I find it's much easier to learn a piece, whether you're picking up by music or by ear, if you already know it, so that getting into the piece, absorbing it is really an important part of the process.
Definitely. And sometimes I meet people who seem to think that that's in some way cheating. And it's, it's not at all. It's just, no. Of course, it makes absolute sense to play pieces that you already know and that you already like, most importantly. It gives you a huge head start with it. And again, it's coming back to this thing about like the listening. If you've learned something through listening to it a lot and assimilating it that way, if it's a song you've heard on the radio lots of times or played to death in your CD player or whatever, you've got an innate sense of the feel of the piece. And again, it's so much easier to imagine what it will be like when you play it yourself than from just seeing some dots on a page.
So we've got one more tune also from the CD, First Things First, The Sands of Hosta. So what's the story behind this piece?
So Hosta is a beach up on the island of North Uist in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. And this is one of those tunes that very much just sort of wrote itself. I'd been teaching up at the Fèis there. That's the festival for children to learn traditional music. And at the end of a long day of teaching, I'd gone for a walk on this beach and came home. I think we had about 10 minutes before dinner was happening, and I just sat down at my harp, and this tune just, it was one that just really fell out of me. It kind of wrote itself very much. And so, yeah, I called it after that beach, Hosta Beach, Sands of Hosta.
From the CD, First Things First, The Sands of Hosta. Beautiful tune from Ailie Robertson. Ailie, the playing, just such delicate playing, such a sweet sound you get out of your harp. That was just beautiful. Really.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's wrap up with a few quick questions. How many harps do you have?
Oh, I think And the honest answer at the moment is about 19, but
Okay.
there's a caveat with that 12 of those are the small cardboard wearing harps, because I bought a whole bunch of them for teaching workshops for kids here. So I think I have 7 proper ones, all of different makes and sizes and varieties.
Excellent. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, the one that I play most often would be my Larry Fisher harp. Larry's a maker in Winnipeg in Canada, and I just absolutely adore that harp.
Yeah, a lot of people like his harps. Favorite composer?
Oh, that's a really hard one. Favorite composer, goodness. Oh, I think I have to pass on that one, too. That's terrible, isn't it? But there's just too many.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, there doesn't have to be an answer. That is your answer.
I feel like my influences range from like Beethoven to Bjork. It could be anything and anyone in between. I love it all.
Yeah, cool. And how about your plans for the next year?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things. I guess at the moment in Scotland, we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with COVID, but hopefully there will be a slow, gradual return to live performance. I'm supposed to be on tour in Germany in November and December, so fingers crossed that will be happening. Then in terms of harping, I guess the next big thing is I've got a book launch at the start of August, and that's actually an exercise book specifically designed for Celtic harp. So really focusing in on the techniques that are needed for Celtic harp playing as opposed to classical harp playing. And then various kind of workshops and Patreon and teaching for other people and other things. And then in January, I'll be running my Winter Harp Festival again. We did the first one of that last year. That was an online festival, and that seemed to work really well. And I think we'll try the same again. People seem to be really appreciative of the chance to learn from wherever they were in the world, especially in the depths of winter. So I think we'll try and do that again.
Excellent. Well, we're including links to your website, your Facebook, your YouTube on the show notes of the podcast so people can find you, follow you, and enjoy your wonderful music. Ailie Robertson, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. This was great. Good luck in the future.
Thank you very much.
If you have questions or guest suggestions, please feel free to email me at openingtheharpchakra@yahoo.com. We've included links to PayPal and Venmo if you'd like to support the production of this podcast. Please subscribe, please share, please tell your friends. And in the coming weeks, we will have more beautiful harp music from all around the world. I'm Jay Michaels. Thank you so much. Peace. Namaste.